It's really hard to tell the story coherently of what happens to plastic. To watch the news and to look at all the media coverage, you would think the debate about plastic waste has already been resolved and won. But then if you actually look at the numbers, not only has the amount of plastic that we're producing massively increased, it's going to increase again significantly in the next 10 years. We are producing more plastic than ever, and it has to go somewhere. So it's very important to know what happens to this stuff after we've finished using it. Tesco is a very large supermarket chain. It's the UK's largest by far. It makes an enormous amount of profit every year. I noticed at my local Tesco superstore that these white boxes has appeared with a big sign on saying, recycle your soft plastics here, recycle your wrappers, your bags, your crisp packets, your bread bags. I wanted to find an electronic way to follow this stuff so I could be absolutely sure, because it's very difficult to track waste streams around the world. So we've just seen a red unmarked lorry, and we're going to follow it for a while and see where it goes. I assumed that all the waste collected by Tesco would have a single outcome. It would go to one place. It would either be buried or it would be recycled. What I discovered was a much more complicated picture than that. It just is very complicated, very messy. There's good and bad. Hi, my name's Kit. I'm an investigative reporter with Bloomberg. Most people have no idea what happens to their waste once they put it in a bin or a trash can, and that's especially true of plastic. It just goes away. It's collected by a van or it's deposited at a recycling point, and then it goes into this hidden ecosystem that very few people have oversight of. It goes off to sort of dirty, smelly places to be sorted and dealt with by someone else, and you don't think about it again. But I was fascinated to find out exactly what happens to it and exactly where these places are and where it goes. Tesco makes a big play of reuse as one of its efforts to help prevent plastic pollution. And by that they mean that the plastic products they're selling to consumers, they want to be able to recycle them and turn them into something else of equivalent. So they want to be able to reuse bottles and packaging that they sell. I had 3 digital trackers placed in wrappers or bags and put into the Tesco boxes, which said they were going to recycle them. And then I had to wait a few days to see where they went. They started to move within 3 or 4 days of me dropping them off, and I could see them moving by truck. One of them went to East London and then sort of disappeared into what looked like the banks of the Thames. It may have been lost, it may have been shaken loose. I really don't know what happened to it. But the 2 other ones took a pretty clear path, which was to go to these Tesco logistics centres, on the outskirts of London, and then they both headed for the same port, which is Harwich International. And from there, they went quiet for a few hours, and the next time I saw them was when they were in the Netherlands and heading east. There are some kinds of plastic that are relatively easy to recycle, and those can be sold on the open market profitably. Things like clear plastic bottles are made from something called PET, and that's good recycling material. You can reuse that over and over again. Clear plastic wrap, as long as it doesn't have a label or colorants or heat retardants in it, is good recycling material. You can melt that down and reprocess it. But as anyone who goes to the supermarket to buy food will know, hardly any of the plastic products that we're sold are just clear wrap. They have labels on. They will normally be coming into contact with food. And all that means that it's not all the same stuff. It's different grades of plastic. And you can't just put all that material together into one bulk load and then melt it and recycle it. What you'd get if you did that is unusable, terrible quality plastic. So what you need to do is separate it. And to this day, the only way to do that is to have people go through by hand, feel the material with their fingers, sometimes burn it with a lighter to work out what grade of plastic it is and separate it into different streams. I had no idea that there's this incredibly expensive and time-consuming process that has to go into separating all the different grades. They didn't stay long in the Netherlands. They passed through very quickly, and then they went on a German motorway and zipped across the country in the space of sort of 12 to 24 hours. And Finally, they crossed the border into Poland, and I could see that both digital trackers, although this happened on different days, ended up at precisely the same spot.
This is the Eurokey site in Zielona Góra.
Zielona Góra is a small town in West Poland. It's relatively close to the border with Germany. So we knew we had to go and see where Tesco's waste was being sent, and we knew the exact location it was going to. So I took a flight to Poland, and I teamed up with my colleague Wojciech, and we simply got in a car and drove out to Zielona Góra and did a drive-by to look at the facility.
You can see piles and piles and piles of plastic. This is an exit gate.
What we found in Zielona Góra was a long industrial building, a warehouse. It must have been as long as a football field or longer. There were hundreds of tons of material just sitting out there waiting to be sent somewhere else.
Mountains of it.
The reason plastic's going there is that there's a particular British-run company called Eurokey, and Eurokey opened this large sorting facility on the outskirts of Zielona Góra, and that's where almost all the waste that's coming through this supermarket system ends up. There are two main reasons why a lot of plastic waste is exported. The first is that disposing of plastic in a developed economy like the UK or Germany or the US is expensive. If you have to landfill, for example, if you have to bury the plastic because you can't use it, that costs, let's say, £100 a tonne to do in the UK. But the equivalent cost in Poland is significantly less. It might cost you £20 or £30 a tonne to use a landfill facility in Poland. But there are also lots of government incentives that are designed to make recycling a more attractive proposition. You get credit from the government for exporting material for recycling. So if your choice is export to Poland or recycle a material in the UK, the government gives you as much financial support for exporting as it does for doing it domestically. I mean, the most important exercise for the purposes of this project was to find out what happens to the bad plastic, because we know that some kinds of plastic are easy to use. The problem that the world has to grapple with is what happens to the bad plastic, what happens to the stuff that simply isn't economic to use again. So one of my digital trackers was inside a lentil puff wrapper, like a snack wrapper. I was very keen to see where that one went. And I saw it on the move again about 24 hours after it had been sorted at Zielona Góra, and it headed east across Poland to a tiny town called Poniatowa, and I found out there that it had been sent to a company called CityLab. CityLab are an Eastern European bag maker. They make garbage bags, essentially, sort of black sacks and things like that. And they have a facility there that can turn soft plastic back into soft plastic. But they also have a way to dispose of the plastic they can't use. They have an on-site incinerator, which provides heat and energy for their factory. Plastics are made from oil. They're essentially fossil fuels, so they burn really well. They burn in a similar way as crude oil does. And so they're great material for incinerating for energy. And in Poland, they have a huge cement industry. The cement industry requires a lot of heat and energy to calcify limestone powder and turn it into cement. They have these gigantic kilns that run up to 1,500 degrees Celsius or 2,000 degrees Celsius. And that has traditionally relied on Polish coal for the energy source to heat the kilns. But in recent years, the cement industry has discovered all this waste material coming into Poland, and that there's an abundance of it, and that it's very, very cheap. And so it's widespread practice across Poland now for plastic garbage and other types of garbage to be incinerated for energy for the cement industry. It's actually better than free fuel because they are paid to take it. If you're a cement maker, waste brokers in Poland will pay you a small sum per tonne to take their waste plastic and incinerate it in your kiln. So you're actually making money from your fuel source. It's a fantastic deal, if you're in the business of making cement. The tracker inside the Tesco plastic bag stopped pinging when it arrived in Zielona Góra after a few days, and I assumed it had been shredded or destroyed or trampled on or taken. And then when I got back from Poland, I was surprised to see its location had changed, and it gave its location as southern Turkey, a couple of 100 kilometers from the Syrian border, in an industrial estate. Not all the plastic that goes to Turkey is going to end up being dumped or buried or incinerated illegally. There are good recycling companies in Turkey that have great reputations, but unfortunately Turkey as a destination for waste has huge problems, and a lot of the plastic that goes to Turkey ends up being illegally disposed of. The tracker ended up at this industrial estate, a sort of a quite remote one. There was no plastic recycling company nearby that we could identify, so we were confused as to why it was there. And we sent a journalist to the ground to drive out and visit this site. What she found outside a warehouse, just left in a big pile, was tons and tons of plastic waste from around Europe. The facility itself wasn't a recycling facility. It was obviously just left there before it could be moved somewhere else. I don't have any idea what happened to the tracker material that went to that industrial estate in Turkey. I can't imagine that it was possible to recycle it, but I don't know what happened to it after that. But we know that Tesco waste material has been found in that very area, for a long period of time. As recently as a few months ago, I spoke to an activist who found a Tesco carrier bag just left by the side of a field in a smouldering pile of burnt plastic. Obviously, it'd been illegally dumped. Tesco is a very large supermarket chain. It's the UK's largest by far. It makes an enormous amount of profit every year, and it also has this incredible logistics infrastructure in place to make sure there's fresh bread and milk and meat at all its stores around the UK. It has a network, and if this entity can't properly dispose of plastic, what hope is there for a little cash-strapped town council that we want to dispose of our plastic by the curbside? The reason Tesco is exporting plastic is because it's the most cost-efficient solution to their problem. So the reality is, despite all the nice words and the good intentions, that still the vast majority of soft plastic that goes into the market is either going to be incinerated or it's going to be buried.